The sword fell in a single flawless stroke, but death lingered. For several agonizing seconds, Anne Boleyn's eyes blinked. Her lips moved, as if whispering a final prayer interrupted forever. Trapped in her severed head, her consciousness clung to life just long enough to glimpse the pale London sky one last time, to hear the sickening rush of her own blood soaking into the straw below. This physiological horror, this brief twitching awareness, was real, backed by multiple eyewitness accounts from that May morning in 1536. But it was nothing compared to the deeper cruelty that had already been inflicted. The story you've been told about Anne Boleyn, a poised queen meeting a swift, dignified end, is a carefully polished myth. In reality, her execution was the brutal climax of a calculated campaign of humiliation, psychological destruction, and total erasure, orchestrated by Henry VIII and his ministers. Decapitation wasn't the punishment, it was the release. The blade from Calais was almost merciful after weeks of torment designed to break her spirit long before her body. If you're drawn to the raw, unfiltered truth of history, where power crushes innocence without remorse, stay with me. This isn't the romantic tragedy of films and novels. This is the dark reality of Tudor justice at its most sadistic, the slow, methodical dismantling of a young woman who dared to rise too high. Anne Boleyn wasn't just executed, she was obliterated, body, reputation, legacy, and all. It began on 2 May 1536. Anne Boleyn, Queen of England for just 3 years, was at Greenwich Palace, watching a tennis match with her husband, King Henry VIII. Suddenly, a messenger arrived summoning her to a council meeting. She left her ladies, expecting a routine matter. Instead, she was confronted by members of the Privy Council, including her uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, and accused of adultery with multiple men, including her own brother, George. The charges were treasonous, not just infidelity, but plotting the king's death to marry one of her lovers. Anne was arrested on the spot and taken by barge to the Tower of London, the same route she had triumphantly sailed for her coronation in 1533. Now, entering through Traitor's Gate, the symbolism was crushing. She collapsed upon arrival, alternating between hysterical laughter and despair, reportedly exclaiming, "I am innocent," to the Constable of the Tower, Sir William Kingston. Kingston's letters to Thomas Cromwell, Henry's chief minister, reveal Anne's emotional turmoil in those first days. She swung from hope that the king was testing her to terror that he truly meant her harm. This psychological whiplash was no accident. The arrests of the accused men, Mark Smeaton, Henry Norris, Francis Weston, William Brereton, and George Boleyn, had begun days earlier. Smeaton, a lowly musician, confessed under torture or pressure to adultery with the Queen. The others denied it vehemently. But the speed of events left Anne reeling. Her closest courtiers, friends, even her brother, swept up in a web of fabricated evidence. Behind this whirlwind stood Henry VIII himself, disillusioned with a marriage that had failed to produce a male heir. Anne's miscarriage in January 1536 was the final blow, and already enamored with Jane Seymour. Henry needed a way out, and a way to secure his dynasty. But the orchestration fell to Thomas Cromwell, his ruthless chief minister. Once allies, Anne and Cromwell had collaborated on religious reforms and the break from Rome. Their relationship soured over policy and power. Anne favored using dissolved monastery wealth for charitable causes. Cromwell funneled it to the crown. More critically, Anne reportedly threatened Cromwell's position, boasting she could have him executed. By April 1536, Cromwell, fearing her influence, aligned with Henry's desires. Ambassador Eustace Chapuis reported that Cromwell, quote, planned and brought about the whole affair under the king's orders, unquote. The charges were absurd. Adultery on specific dates, often when Anne was visibly pregnant or recovering from childbirth. Incest with George? Plotting regicide? No solid evidence existed beyond coerced confessions and gossip. Yet a grand jury indicted her, and trials followed swiftly. On 12 May, 4 of the accused men, Norris, Weston, Brereton, and Smeaton, were tried at Westminster. All but Smeaton, who pleaded guilty, likely to save his life, protested innocence. Guilty verdicts came quickly. They were sentenced to the traitor's death, hanging, drawing, and quartering. Anne and George faced trial on 15 May inside the Tower, before 2,000 spectators and a jury of peers led by her uncle Norfolk. Anne defended herself brilliantly, dismantling inconsistencies in the accusations. Witnesses noted her composure and eloquence. George, too, fought fiercely, reading aloud Smeaton's confession to expose its flaws. Yet the outcome was rigged. Both guilty,
sentenced to burn or behead at the king's pleasure.
Henry commuted the men's sentences to beheading on 17 May and Anne's to the sword, a mercy, importing an expert swordsman from Calais. But the delays in her execution, originally set for 18 May, prolonged the agony. Kingston reported Anne's fluctuating moods, one moment laughing at the absurdity, the next weeping in fear. The true cruelty lay not in the blade, but in the preceding isolation. Anne was stripped of her queenship before death. On 17th May, Archbishop Cranmer annulled her marriage, bastardizing her daughter Elizabeth. She was no longer queen, merely Lady Anne Boleyn. Her household dissolved, her jewels and gowns redistributed. Her family, father, mother, siblings, abandoned or implicated. Publicly, she was smeared as a witch-like seductress, her reputation poisoned for centuries. Privately, the uncertainty gnawed, hopes of pardon dashed repeatedly. Anne spent nights praying, preparing for death while clinging to life. On 19th May 1536, around 9 a.m., Anne walked to the scaffold on Tower Green. Dressed in gray damask with crimson petticoat, symbolizing martyrdom, she appeared composed, even radiant to some witnesses. She distributed alms, forgave her executioner, and delivered the traditional scaffold speech. "Good Christian people, I am come hither to die, for according to the law and by the law I am judged to die, and therefore I will speak nothing against it. I am come hither to accuse no man, nor to speak anything of that whereof I am accused and condemned to die. But I pray God save the king and send him long to reign over you, for a gentler nor a more merciful prince was there never, and to me he was ever a good, a gentle, and sovereign lord. And if any person will meddle of my cause, I require them to judge the best. And thus I take my leave of the world and of you all, and I heartily desire you all to pray for me. O Lord, have mercy on me, to God I commend my soul." She praised Henry extravagantly. Protocol demanded it, but perhaps she hoped for mercy or to protect Elizabeth. Blindfolded, she knelt. The swordsman, to ease her fear, distracted her by calling for his sword while approaching from behind. One stroke, and it was over. Yet accounts describe her eyes and lips moving briefly afterward, a reflex of decapitation, where nerves fire for seconds. Consciousness? Likely fleeting, if at all. But in that moment, the horror peaked. Her ladies wrapped her head and body in cloth, burying her hastily in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, an unmarked grave, denying her proper rights. Henry married Jane Seymour days later. Anne's name was erased from records, her mottos chiseled away. Her daughter Elizabeth grew up shadowed by her mother's treason. The Boleyn faction crumbled. This was no mere execution. It was psychological warfare, false accusations shattering trust, isolation breeding despair, delays heightening terror, annulment stripping identity. Henry and Cromwell didn't just kill Anne, they annihilated her existence. Even hardened Tudors were shocked. A queen executed? Unprecedented. Yet power prevailed. Anne Boleyn, the witty, charismatic reformer who helped reshape England, was reduced to a cautionary tale. Most history books boil Anne Boleyn's fate down to a footnote: beheaded for adultery and treason in 1536. Clean, quick, over. But that sanitized version hides a nightmare of deliberate psychological warfare. By May 19, 1536, Anne had already endured 17 days of imprisonment in the Tower of London, the very same walls where just 3 years earlier she'd prepared for her triumphant coronation as queen. Imagine the irony. The fortress that once echoed with celebrations for her crowning now held her as a condemned traitor. Her execution date was announced, then abruptly postponed. Not once, but multiple times. This wasn't bureaucratic error. It was torture by uncertainty. Henry VIII and Thomas Cromwell stretched time on purpose, forcing Anne to rehearse her own death endlessly in her mind. Every dawn, is today the day? Every night, no answer, just the cold stone walls closing in. This limbo was a masterclass in mental breakdown. Modern psychologists would recognize it instantly. Prolonged anticipation of death triggers extreme stress, dissociation, and emotional exhaustion. Anne was isolated from allies, bombarded with grotesque rumors of her alleged depravities circulating outside, and kept in a state of disorientation. Sleep deprivation, false accusations repeated until they felt real, strategic isolation, tactics eerily similar to modern interrogation methods.
And the charges?
Adultery with 5 men, including her own brother George. Incest, plotting to murder the king. Implausible, fabricated nonsense that no fair court today would entertain for a second. But truth wasn't the point. This was about power. Henry didn't just want Anne gone. He wanted her replaced without scandal. By painting her as a monstrous whore, he justified annulling their marriage, delegitimizing their daughter Elizabeth, and clearing the path for Jane Seymour. The imported swordsman from Calais often spun as Henry's mercy over the clumsy English axe. Wrong, it was theater, a precise foreign spectacle to underscore that Anne's death belonged entirely to the king, not England, not tradition. Even her final moments were stripped of national dignity. Witnesses noted Anne's supernatural calm in her last hours, laughing, joking about her little neck. Not bravery alone, disassociation, the mind's desperate shield when survival seems impossible. She cracked dark humor to cope with collapse. The real challenge here isn't accepting she died, it's grasping how her destruction began long before the scaffold, in a web of gaslighting and reputational assassination that left her spirit shattered first. To understand the psychological torment inflicted on Anne Boleyn, we must first trace the origins of her downfall, which were rooted not in her alleged crimes, but in the volatile whims of a king desperate for a male heir and the calculated ambitions of his chief minister, Thomas Cromwell. By early 1536, Anne's position as queen was precarious. She had given Henry a daughter, Elizabeth, in 1533, but subsequent pregnancies ended in miscarriages, the last in January 1536, a stillborn boy that shattered Henry's hopes. This failure mirrored the very reason Henry had divorced his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, the lack of a surviving son to secure the Tudor dynasty. Henry's growing infatuation with Jane Seymour, a demure lady-in-waiting who contrasted sharply with Anne's fiery intellect and reformist zeal, further eroded their marriage. But Henry couldn't simply annul another union without risking his reputation as a reformer king who had broken with Rome to marry Anne. He needed a clean break, one that painted Anne as the villain. Enter Thomas Cromwell, the self-made lawyer and administrator who had risen to become Henry's most trusted advisor. Cromwell, once an ally to Anne in pushing Protestant reforms, had clashed with her over the distribution of wealth from dissolved monasteries. Anne advocated for charitable uses. Cromwell directed funds to the crown, enriching himself and Henry in the process. Historians debate the exact catalyst, but evidence suggests Cromwell orchestrated Anne's fall to protect his own power and align with conservative factions at court who resented her influence. Ambassador Eustache Chapuis, a contemporary observer and no friend to Anne, he represented the Catholic Holy Roman Emperor, reported in dispatches that Cromwell boasted of having planned and brought about the whole affair. This wasn't mere opportunism, it was a premeditated campaign. Cromwell's network of spies and informants gathered gossip from the court, twisting innocent flirtations and courtly banter into evidence of treasonous adultery. The charges were timed perfectly. Arrests began in late April, just as Henry was courting Jane Seymour openly. The psychological impact on Anne Boleyn began even before her arrest. Rumors swirled at court of the king's displeasure. Anne, known for her sharp wit and emotional volatility, sensed the shift. In one reported incident shortly before her fall, she confronted Henry about Jane, leading to a heated argument where he warned her to close her eyes as her predecessors had. This veiled threat foreshadowed the terror to come, planting seeds of dread in her mind. On May 2, 1536, Anne was at Greenwich Palace, ostensibly enjoying a tennis match. A messenger summoned her to the Privy Council. Expecting a routine matter, she arrived to face accusations of adultery, incest, and treason, crimes punishable by death. Her uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, delivered the charges, adding a layer of familial betrayal that must have cut deeply. She was immediately arrested and transported by barge to the Tower of London, entering through Traitor's Gate, a symbolic descent from glory to infamy. Eyewitnesses from Sir William Kingston, the constable of the Tower, provide a vivid window into Anne's initial psychological state. In letters to Cromwell, Kingston described her arriving in a state of shock, collapsing and alternating between hysterical laughter and tears. She protested her innocence vehemently, exclaiming, "I am the king's true wedded wife," but also expressed confusion. "What is the matter? I have done nothing." This oscillation, calm resignation punctuated by bouts of hysteria, mirrors what modern psychology terms acute stress response, where the mind grapples with sudden trauma through denial, anger, and despair. The Tower itself amplified this torment. Anne was lodged in the same royal apartments where she had prepared for her coronation in 1533, a cruel irony that forced her to confront her fall from grace daily. Stripped of her household, she was attended by women chosen by Cromwell, including Lady Kingston, the constable's wife, and others instructed to report her every word. These attendants were not sympathetic. They were spies, relaying her ramblings to fuel the case against her. Anne's isolation was total.
No visits from family, no contact with supporters. Even her chaplain was denied until the end. The 17 days between arrest and execution were a deliberate exercise in psychological destruction. Initially, Anne's trial was rushed, but her execution was postponed twice, first from May 18 to 19, ostensibly to allow the swordsman from Calais to arrive. Historians argue this delay was intentional, designed to heighten her anxiety and extract any concessions or breakdowns that could bolster the king's narrative. Kingston's reports detail Anne's fluctuating moods, one day hopeful of pardon, the next despairing. She joked morbidly about her fate, saying, "I shall have justice," but also wept, fearing for her daughter. This torture by uncertainty has parallels in modern psychological studies of death row inmates, where the anticipation of execution causes severe mental deterioration, including PTSD-like symptoms, dissociation, and suicidal ideation. In Tudor England, while physical torture was reserved for commoners, nobles were exempt, mental anguish was weaponized. Sleep deprivation likely played a role. The tower's noisy, drafty cells and constant surveillance would have prevented rest. Anne's religious faith provided some solace. She spent hours in prayer, but even that was manipulated. Cromwell ensured her confessions were twisted to imply guilt. Rumors from outside the walls added to the gaslighting. Court gossip painted Anne as a witch and adulteress, accusations that reached her through her attendants. One letter attributed to Anne, though its authenticity is debated, pleads with Henry, "Try me, good king, but let me have a lawful trial." Whether genuine or not, it captures the desperation of a woman fighting invisible enemies. The accusations against Anne were not just false, they were absurdly implausible, engineered to humiliate and discredit her. Adultery on dates when she was pregnant or postpartum, incest with her brother George, plotting Henry's death with lovers. The evidence relied on coerced confessions, particularly from musician Mark Smeaton, who admitted under torture or threat thereof to sleeping with the Queen. The other accused, Henry Norris, Francis Weston, William Brereton, and George Boleyn, denied everything, but the trials were showpieces. Anne's trial on May 15th, before 2,000 spectators in the Tower's Great Hall, was a farce. She defended herself eloquently, exposing timeline inconsistencies, but the jury, stacked with enemies, including her uncle Norfolk as judge. Guilty verdict inevitable, she was sentenced to burn or behead. George's trial followed, where he mocked the charges, but to no avail. Psychologically, these proceedings were devastating. Public humiliation stripped Anne of dignity, forcing her to confront betrayal by kin and courtiers. Modern interpretations like this to character assassination, where false narratives erode self-worth, leading to internalized doubt. Anne's reported laughter during imprisonment may have been a coping mechanism, a form of gallows humor to reclaim agency amid powerlessness. Thomas Cromwell's role cannot be overstated. As Henry's fixer, he assembled the case with chilling efficiency, targeting not just Anne, but her faction. His motives blended self-preservation, Anne had threatened him, with opportunity, aligning with conservatives like the Seymours. Cromwell's fallen in 1540, ironically over another failed marriage to Anne of Cleves, echoed Anne's: swift arrest, no trial, execution. But in 1536, he was untouchable, using interrogation tactics that broke Smeaton without formal torture.
Historians like G.W. Bernard argue Cromwell acted on Henry's orders, not independently, but others see him as the mastermind. Either way, his methods, spreading rumors, isolating the accused, delaying resolutions, were psychological warfare at its Tudor finest. Viewing Anne's ordeal through contemporary psychology reveals its sophistication as torture. Prolonged uncertainty mimics learned helplessness, where victims lose hope after repeated unpredictability. Isolation fostered Stockholm-like dependency on captors. Anne's pleas to Henry suggest this. Tudor executions were spectacles, but the prelude was private torment. Foucault's analysis of punishment as power display applies. Anne's annihilation restored Henry's authority. Disassociation, evident in her calm scaffold demeanor, is a trauma response where the mind detaches to endure horror. Comparisons to medieval torture devices are apt. While Anne avoided physical racks, mental equivalents, false hope, rumor mills were equally brutal. On May 19th, Anne walked to Tower Green, composed in gray damask. Her speech praised Henry, a required script to protect Elizabeth. The Calais swordsman struck cleanly. Witnesses noted her lips moving post-decapitation, a neural reflex. Buried unmarked in St. Peter ad Vincula, her erasure continued. Henry married Jane 11 days later. Anne's story exposes Tudor tyranny's dark underbelly. Her daughter Elizabeth's reign bore scars of this trauma. Today, Anne symbolizes resilience against patriarchal power.
her psychological ordeal a cautionary tale of how minds can be broken before bodies. Let's peel back the layers of Anne Boleyn's final days, step by agonizing step, using contemporary accounts from ambassadors, Tower records, and eyewitnesses like Lancelot de Carl and William Kingston. It started with isolation. Arrested on May 2, 1536, Anne was rowed to the Tower amid whispers of treason. Once inside, she faced relentless questioning. Denied access to friends or family, she was surrounded by hostile ladies-in-waiting, women loyal to the old regime, like Lady Kingston, who reported her every word back to Cromwell. The delays were devastating, execution scheduled, then cancelled repeatedly. Anne swung from hysteria to numb acceptance. Kingston wrote of her laughing one moment, weeping the next, confessing fears for her soul while swearing innocence. She spent nights in prayer, requesting the sacrament at 2 a.m., kneeling for hours as sleep evaded her. Rumors flooded in, tales of her sexual depravity spread deliberately to poison public opinion. Bizarre stories, no evidence, coerced confessions from men like Mark Smeaton under torture. The ghoul manufacture belief. Power controls reality through repetition. 5 men died first on May 17th, her brother George among them. Brutal beheadings on Tower Hill. This sequencing wasn't coincidence. It proved her guilt before she could speak, silencing any contradiction. By dawn on May 19th, Anne was exhausted, awake nearly 24 hours, yet reports describe her radiant, composed. She dressed elegantly in gray damask, ermine trim, a final assertion of queenship. Escorted through corridors where courtiers once bowed, now they stared in silence. Indifference replaced loyalty. The scaffold on Tower Green was low, barely knee-high, no grand platform for dignity. It kept her eye level with the crowd of about 1,000 to 2,000 nobles and officials, a carnival atmosphere encouraged, with cheers and cheers seated by the regime. Public humiliation was key. Death alone wasn't enough. She had to be degraded. Her speech measured, submissive. Good Christian people, I come hither to die. I pray God save the king, a gentle and merciful prince. No confession of guilt, a subtle defiance. She praised Henry to protect Elizabeth, knowing every word would be reported. Blindfolded, kneeling upright, French style, no block, she prayed constantly. Eyes darting under cloth, straining for the swordsman's approach. The weight, pure torture. He struck swiftly, one blow. Then the horror. Head severed, but eyes and lips moved seconds after. Residual brain activity, yes, but to witnesses it blurred life and death. Several fainted. Unsettling proof death wasn't clean. No coffin ready, a deliberate insult. Her lady scrambled for an arrow chest. Body and head crammed in, buried hastily under the chapel floor without ceremony. Erasure and death. Aftermath rippled, portraits destroyed, symbols ripped down.
Speaking her name risked danger. Elizabeth declared bastard. Household dissolved. Her ladies traumatized. Nightmares. One entering a convent. Henry? Engaged to Jane Seymour the next day. Married 11 days later. Administrative efficiency. Anne processed, replaced. This exploration reveals not a swift end, but sustained cruelty, psychological torture, narrative control, legacy purge. The downfall accelerated in late April 1536, fueled by Henry VIII's disillusionment after Anne's January miscarriage and his infatuation with Jane Seymour. Thomas Cromwell, once Anne's ally, orchestrated the accusations to align with conservative factions and secure his position. Eustace Trapeze, the imperial ambassador and staunch supporter of Catherine of Aragon, reported Cromwell boasting he had planned and brought about the whole affair. On 2 May, Anne attended a tennis match at Greenwich when summoned to council. Accused of adultery with Henry Norris, Francis Weston, William Brereton, Mark Smeaton, and incest with her brother George, plus plotting the king's death, she was arrested. Rowed to the Tower via Traitor's Gate, the symbolic reversal crushed her, the same path she took triumphantly for her 1533 coronation. Upon arrival, Anne collapsed. Sir William Kingston, Constable of the Tower, described her in letters to Cromwell as alternating hysteria and laughter. She fell into great laughing, and hath done many times since. She protested innocence, but swung between hope, I think the king does it to prove me, and despair. Kingston lodged her in the royal apartments, ironic cruelty, as these rooms hosted her pre-coronation festivities. Attended by hostile women, Lady Kingston, Mistress Coffin, Lady Boleyn, Anne's aunt, chosen by Cromwell to spy, her every word was reported. Isolation was absolute. No family, no allies. From 2 to 19 May, Anne endured 17 days of limbo. Kingston's letters reveal emotional volatility. One day hopeful of pardon or nunnery exile after Cranmer's visit, next fearing death. She joked morbidly about her little neck and the executioner's skill, but wept over Elizabeth's fate. Delays prolonged agony.
Execution set for 18 May, postponed for the Calais swordsman. Kingston noted her requesting the sacrament at odd hours, praying fervently while sleep evaded her. Rumors of her depravity circulated outside, fed by regime propaganda. Charges were implausible: adultery during pregnancy, incest. Smeaton confessed under pressure, others denied. Chaphues called verdicts based on presumption and certain indications without valid proof. The men's executions on 17 May preceded hers, proving guilt publicly. George defended eloquently but died anyway. On 15 May, Anne and George tried inside the Tower before 2,000 spectators, jury led by Uncle Norfolk. Anne dismantled accusations brilliantly but guilty. Sentenced to burn or behead. Henry chose sword, a mercy but theatrical. Lancelot de Carl, French diplomat and eyewitness via informant, described in his poem her composure yet underlying despair. By 18 May, Anne was prepared to die, per de Carl. Awake nearly 24 hours on 19 May, she communed devoutly, swearing innocence on damnation of her soul, even to hostile attendants. Around 9 a.m., Anne walked to Tower Green scaffold, low, intimate, eye level with 1,000 to 2,000 crowd. Atmosphere mixed, some jeers but many moved. Her speech, per Edward Hall and variants: "Good Christian people, I am come hither to die. I pray God save the king and send him long to reign over you, for a gentler nor a more merciful prince was there never. If any person will meddle of my cause, I require them to judge the best." No guilt admission, defiance veiled in protocol, protecting Elizabeth. Blindfolded, kneeling, no block, French style, she prayed. Swordsman distracted her. "Where's my sword?" Struck from behind, one clean blow. Yet horror, lips and eyes moved briefly post-severance. Eyewitnesses, de Carl, Poem and others, noted this neural reflex. Some fainted. Modern science confirms brief residual activity, but to Tudor's, unnerving. The morning of May 19, 1536, broke clear and cruel over London. Anne Boleyn, fractured but resolute, faced her climax. After a sleepless night in prayer, she laughed with her ladies, macabre humor masking breakdown. He'll be known as Anne Sans Tête, she joked of the executioner. Escorted at 9 a.m., she walked steadily. Witnesses, never more beautiful. Gray gown, crimson petticoat flashing as she climbed the low steps. Crowd hushed, she spoke, obedient, unconfessing. Forgave executioner, tipped him, blindfolded herself. Kneeling, praying fervently. Swordsman, expert from Calais, distracted her with a ruse. "Bring me the sword." Struck from behind, clean sever.
Head lifted by hair, customary proof. Blood flowed, face pale but composed. Eyes blinked, lips formed words. Final prayer? Crowd horrified, distress widespread. Body stripped, crammed into arrow chest, buried unmarked in St. Peter Advincula. Henry awaited news at Whitehall, planning his next wedding. Bells rang citywide, civic ritual announcing power's triumph. This climax wasn't mercy. It was performative dominance, efficient death aestheticized, horror exposed, warning issued, Anne undone completely. The night of May 1819 was one of exhaustive devotion and emotional volatility. After 17 days of imprisonment, Anne had been informed the execution would proceed the next morning. Sir William Kingston, the Tower's constable, reported her readiness. She spent hours in prayer, receiving the sacrament multiple times and swearing her innocence upon it, even to her hostile attendants. Contemporary accounts, including those relayed through Lancelot de Carl, a French poet and diplomat whose work draws from an eyewitness, and Portuguese reports, describe her as alternately calm and agitated. She confessed fears for her soul, but maintained innocence. Sleep evaded her. She remained awake nearly 24 hours, kneeling before the altar in her chamber. In moments of dark humor, perhaps a defense against collapse, she joked with her ladies about her little neck being easy for the executioner, and quipped that he would be dubbed Monsieur en sans tête, Anne without head. This macabre wit shocked even her spies, who reported it back to Cromwell. By dawn, exhaustion mingled with a supernatural composure. Witnesses later remarked she appeared radiant, as if illuminated by inner resolve or dissociation from the impending horror. As the sun rose on a crisp May morning, Anne prepared meticulously. She chose her attire with symbolic intent: a gown of gray damask trimmed with ermine, a crimson petticoat beneath, crimson often signifying martyrdom in Tudor iconography, and an English gable hood rather than the French style she favored, perhaps a nod to her adopted nation or a subtle reclamation of queenship. Her hair was gathered under a coif, ready for the blade. She distributed small alms to her attendants and requested the sacrament one last time, communing devoutly. At approximately 9 a.m., Anne emerged from the royal apartments and walked across Tower Green, a short distance, yet laden with symbolism. The path passed areas where courtiers once bowed. Now guards and officials stared in silence.
The scaffold was deliberately low, barely knee-high, unlike the grand platforms for public executions on Tower Hill. This intimacy forced the crowd of 1,000 to 2,000, nobles, officials, select commoners, to stand eye level with the condemned, heightening the spectacle's immediacy. Built overnight, it was draped in black cloth, strewn with straw to absorb blood. The expert swordsman from Calais, Jean Rambaud, waited disguised among the crowd, sword hidden. Anne ascended the few steps steadily, without faltering. Eyewitnesses, including de Carl and chronicler Edward Hall, noted her composure. She appeared as if she had never been more beautiful nor more joyful. Facing the hushed assembly, Anne delivered the traditional scaffold speech, measured, submissive, yet carefully worded to avoid confession. "Good Christian people, I am come hither to die, for according to the law and by the law I am judged to die, and therefore I will speak nothing against it. I am come hither to accuse no man, nor to speak anything of that whereof I am accused and condemned to die. But I pray God save the king, and send him long to reign over you. For a gentler nor more merciful prince was there never, and to me he was ever a good, a gentle, and sovereign lord. And if any person will meddle of my cause, I require them to judge the best. And thus I take my leave of the world and of you all, and I heartily desire you all to pray for me. O Lord, have mercy on me. To God I commend my soul." She praised Henry extravagantly, required by protocol, but omitted any admission of guilt. This subtle defiance protected her daughter Elizabeth from further bastardization and ensured her words wouldn't be twisted against survivors. She then forgave the executioner, tipping him 20 gold crowns, customary, to ensure a swift strike, and helped remove her hood and mantle. Blindfolded by one of her ladies, or herself per some accounts, Anne kneeled upright in the French manner, no block needed for the sword. She prayed continuously, "Jesus receive my soul. O Lord God, have pity on my soul." To spare her prolonged fear, the executioner employed a ruse, calling aloud for his sword while approaching silently from behind. One swift, flawless stroke severed her head.
The body slumped forward, blood soaking the straw. Custom demanded the executioner lift the head by the hair, proclaiming, "So die all the king's enemies." But accounts vary. Some say he held it aloft, revealing a face pale yet serene. Others note he quickly concealed it. Then the lingering horror. Multiple witnesses, de Carl, Alexander Alice, and leader chroniclers, described the eyes and lips moving briefly, blinking, forming words, as if continuing prayer. This was a physiological reflex, nerves firing post-decapitation, consciousness fleeting if present at all, but to the Tudor crowd it blurred life and death. Several reportedly fainted. Distress rippled through even hardened spectators. No coffin had been prepared, a final insult. Her ladies, weeping despite prior hostility, wrapped the head in cloth and body in a sheet. Scrambling, they commandeered an old elm arrow chest from the Tower Armory, too short, forcing them to cram the remains inside. The procession carried the chest to the nearby chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, where Anne was buried hastily in an unmarked grave before the altar. No rites, no ceremony, denied even a proper queen's funeral. At Whitehall Palace, Henry awaited news dressed in white, mourning or celebration. Upon confirmation, he proceeded with plans for Jane Seymour. The couple became betrothed the next day, married on May 30. City bells rang out, not for mourning, but as civic ritual signaling the execution of traitors and restoration of order. Power's triumph announced. This climax was no act of mercy. The imported sword aestheticized death, making it swift and humane compared to the axe. But it was theater, foreign precision underscoring Henry's absolute control, not bound by English tradition. The low scaffold, intimate crowd, lingering neural horror, all amplified the warning. Even a crowned queen could be undone. Anne's obliteration, body desecrated, legacy smeared, name erased, was total. Yet in her composure, unconfessing speech, and radiant finality, she reclaimed agency. The regime sought to break her completely. Instead, her dignity endures, transforming victim into icon of resilience against tyranny. Anne Boleyn to execution wasn't tragedy's end. It was power's masterpiece of cruelty. From psychological dismantling to physical spectacle and historical erasure, Henry VIII ensured not just her death, but annihilation. Yet she endures. Her daughter Elizabeth became England's greatest queen. Fragments survived the purge, letters, accounts, reconstructing her as intelligent, reform-minded, flawed but human. This story warns, when authority controls narrative, truth dies too. Anne's conscious final gaze reminds us of fragile humanity under tyranny. The myth of dignified end conceals state-sanctioned gaslighting, gender-targeted destruction, recurring patterns. If this darker truth moved you, like, comment your city, country/country, love knowing where you're from, and subscribe for more unfiltered history. Thanks for watching. See you next time.
What happened to Anne Boleyn in May 1536 was not a single act of judicial violence. It was a meticulously orchestrated campaign of total destruction: body, mind, reputation, legacy. Henry VIII and Thomas Cromwell did not simply want her dead, they wanted her erased from existence. The psychological warfare began long before the Tower. Rumors, betrayals, sudden arrests of her inner circle, all designed to isolate and destabilize. 17 days of imprisonment in the very rooms where she had prepared for coronation turned triumph into torment. Delays in execution date, hostile attendants spying on every word, false hopes raised and crushed. These were deliberate tools to break her spirit. The charges themselves, adultery with 5 men, incest with her brother, plotting regicide, were so outlandish they bordered on farce, yet they served a lethal purpose. By painting Anne as a monstrous seductress and witch-like figure, the regime justified annulling the marriage, bastardizing Elizabeth, and clearing the path for Jane Seymour. Truth was irrelevant. Narrative control was everything. Even the mercy of the French sword was theater. Importing an expert executioner from Calais aestheticized the killing, presenting it as refined rather than barbaric. The low scaffold on Tower Green, the intimate crowd, the lingering neural reflexes that horrified witnesses, all amplified the spectacle. This was death as performance, swift, elegant, unforgettable. A warning to every courtier, every noble, every future consort. Even a crowned queen could be reduced to nothing. The erasure continued after the blade fell. No coffin prepared, body crammed into an arrow chest, buried unmarked in the chapel floor. Portraits destroyed, mottos chiseled from palace walls, her name dangerous to speak. Her household dissolved, her jewels redistributed, her daughter demoted. Henry married Jane 11 days later, as if Anne had never existed.
The very mechanisms meant to obliterate her failed in the long run. Her daughter Elizabeth, declared bastard, shadowed by her mother's treason, ascended the throne in 1558 and became one of England's most iconic monarchs. The Tudor dynasty's greatest glory came through the child Anne was executed for failing to protect with a son. Fragments survived the purge: Kingston's letters to Cromwell, Chapuis's dispatches, Lancelot de Carle's poem, scattered eyewitness accounts. These contemporary voices pierced the official silence. Over centuries, historians pieced them together, reconstructing a more human Anne. Witty, educated, passionately reformist, musically gifted, deeply religious, ambitious, sometimes sharp-tongued, but never the cartoon villain of propaganda. Modern scholarship has vindicated her innocence almost unanimously. The charges collapse under scrutiny. Impossible timelines, coerced confessions, absence of motive or evidence. Anne was not a traitor. She was an obstacle to Henry's dynastic desperation, to Cromwell's political maneuvering, to a patriarchal order threatened by a queen who spoke her mind. That final haunting detail, the brief movement of eyes and lips after decapitation, has gripped imaginations for nearly 500 years. Science explains it as residual neural activity, a reflex lasting seconds. But to the Tudor witnesses who saw it, and to us who read their accounts, it blurs the line between life and death. In that fleeting moment, Anne seems to resist even the blade, still praying, still conscious, still present. It serves as a metaphor for her entire story. Absolute power sought to silence her completely, yet something escaped. Her gaze lingers across centuries, accusing, reminding us how fragile humanity is under tyranny. The patterns are uncomfortably familiar: state-sanctioned character assassination, gaslighting on a public scale, smearing a woman's sexuality to destroy her credibility, controlling the historical narrative to justify present actions. When authority can rewrite reality, labeling innocence as guilt, loyalty as treason, truth itself becomes the first casualty. Anne's fall was gendered in ways that resonate today. A woman who rose too high, spoke too boldly, failed to produce a son, and refused to fade quietly was recast as monstrous. The language used against her, whore, witch, adulteress, echoes in modern attacks on female leaders and public figures who challenge power. In the end, Anne Boleyn did not vanish. She transformed. From obliterated queen to cautionary tale, from villain in Tudor propaganda to feminist icon, martyr for religious reform, symbol of resilience.
Her story forces us to question official histories, to listen for silent voices, to recognize cruelty disguised as justice. Her daughter's reign, the Elizabethan Golden Age, was built on the ashes of her mother's destruction. The Tudor rose bloomed brightest through the line Henry tried to sever. That is the ultimate irony, and perhaps Anne's quiet victory. If this journey through the darker truth of Anne Boleyn's final days moved you, if it unsettled you, angered you, or simply made you see history differently, thank you for staying until the end. Like this video if it gripped you, drop a comment with your city or country. I genuinely love knowing where these stories reach. And subscribe for more unfiltered dives into the raw, uncomfortable truths polite history books leave out.